The President of the United States took the stage at the United Nations General Assembly, a forum usually meant for leaders to promote cooperation, and instead delivered a speech filled with bold claims and sharp declarations. He presented himself as the restorer of America's greatness, insisting that the country was enjoying a new golden age. He said the U.S. had the world's strongest economy, borders, military, and alliances. He even claimed inflation had been defeated, that energy and food costs were falling, and that the stock market had reached record highs, nearly 50 times in a short span. However, the reality was less clear-cut. While U.S. markets were indeed strong, inflation was still affecting areas like housing, and global economic growth was slowing. This gap between his words and the data likely explained why the audience responded with silence rather than applause. After celebrating the economy, he turned to one of his signature topics, immigration. He described the southern border as completely secured, saying that for 4 consecutive months, not a single undocumented immigrant had entered the country. He painted a picture of past chaos, describing millions pouring in from around the world, including criminals and people released from prisons. But government reports did not back this up. While numbers had fallen compared to earlier spikes, official data showed the figure was far from zero. Commentators said the president's remarks on immigration were exaggerated, designed more to paint a striking picture than to reflect the actual situation at the border. He then shifted his focus from the U.S. to Europe, warning that European nations were being overrun by migrants. He claimed the continent was facing an invasion, insisting that illegal aliens were flooding in unchecked and that European countries were, in his words, going to hell. But his description clashed with reality. Fact checks, including one by The Guardian, noted that the idea of Europe having fully open borders was misleading. While the Schengen Agreement allows free travel between participating countries inside the EU, external borders remain closely monitored. And in the UK, where immigration has long been politically charged, the end of freedom of movement after Brexit in 2020 led to the introduction of a points-based immigration system, making border control even stricter. After addressing immigration, the president shifted to foreign policy, highlighting what he described as victories in strengthening alliances and promoting peace. On NATO, he credited himself with persuading member nations to dramatically boost defense spending. He claimed that, following his push, nearly every country in the alliance had agreed to raise their contributions from 2% to 5% of their GDP, making NATO stronger than ever. He then turned to international conflicts, making an even bigger claim that in just 7 months, he had brought an end to 7 wars that others had considered impossible to resolve. He listed conflicts ranging from Southeast Asia to the Middle East and Africa, including disputes involving Cambodia, Kosovo, India and Pakistan, Israel and Iran, and others. He presented these as violent, long-standing crises that had now been settled under his leadership, something, he said, no other world leader had ever achieved. The atmosphere in the hall told its own story. Reactions were muted, and many delegates appeared skeptical, especially as the president listed conflicts that, in reality, remain unsettled. Some of the disputes he claimed to have resolved, such as the long-running tensions between India and Pakistan, have dragged on for decades, with only brief pauses and hostility. Fact-checkers were quick to note that his sweeping claim of ending 7 wars did not match the situation on the ground. For diplomats who deal with these issues daily, the exaggeration did little to bolster his credibility. The contrast was especially clear when compared to earlier moments in UN history. In 2009, President Barack Obama used his first address to the General Assembly to stress cooperation rather than confrontation. He reminded world leaders that challenges like nuclear weapons, climate change, terrorism, poverty, and disease were too large for any nation to solve alone, urging collective action instead of division. Obama, in his 2009 address, called on nations to act as partners. He urged cooperation to stop the spread of nuclear weapons, to confront climate change, and to defend universal human rights. He emphasized that progress should be measured by real actions, rather than lofty promises, and imagined a world where dialogue took the place of division. For many, his words represented a revival of multilateralism, with the U.S. presenting itself not as a lone power, but as part of a broader global effort for peace and progress. Returning to Trump's speech, the contrast was stark. After portraying himself as a peacemaker, he pivoted to criticizing the very institution where he was speaking. He questioned the value of the United Nations, saying it had great potential but failed to live up to it. According to him, the UN was content with issuing strongly worded letters that never led to meaningful action. Only real action, he said, could end wars. The criticism, delivered from the UN's own stage, fell flat. Delegates remained mostly expressionless, some trading quick glances. The irony of an American president dismissing the UN while standing in its most important chamber was not lost on the audience. Other leaders at the assembly offered a very different perspective. Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto reminded delegates that true justice, not raw power, should guide international relations. Might cannot be right, he said, adding that no single country has the right to dominate the rest of humanity. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan also pushed back against the idea of power politics. He called for a return to the original spirit of the United Nations, declaring, "The world is bigger than 5, a reference to the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. His point was clear. A fairer system should be built where justice, rather than power, sets the rules. These appeals stood in sharp contrast to the U.S. president's harsh criticisms, highlighting the clash of visions over how the global order should be shaped. From there, Trump turned to climate change and delivered one of his most provocative remarks. He referenced a past prediction, claiming that in 1982, the head of the UN Environment Program had warned that climate change would bring about global catastrophe by the year 2000, an outcome he compared to the devastation of nuclear war. Trump continued his criticism by pointing to past UN warnings about climate change, dismissing them as false alarms. He cited a 1989 statement predicting that rising seas could wipe entire nations off the map within a decade, remarking that it didn't happen. He mocked the shifting terminology over the years, from global cooling to global warming to climate change, arguing that the new label was broad enough to never be wrong. To him, the entire issue was nothing more than the greatest con job ever pulled on the world. He also ridiculed renewable energy, calling it overpriced, unreliable, and incapable of powering modern economies. In his words, all green is all bankrupt. Yet scientific consensus tells a very different story. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, drawing on thousands of studies, has consistently warned of rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and devastating human costs if action is not taken. For many countries, especially small island states facing the risk of being submerged, Trump's remarks were not just dismissive but dangerous. It was no surprise, then, that his comments left many in the chamber visibly uneasy. As if his speech hadn't already stirred enough controversy, Trump turned to personal attacks, singling out London's mayor as terrible and accusing the city of veering toward Sharia law, remarks that drew sharp reactions. Near the end, he tried to shift back to a more elevated tone. He urged leaders to defend their borders, safeguard their people, honor their cultures and traditions, and protect freedom. He praised the diversity of nations gathered in the hall, calling each one majestic and unique. Yet, despite the lofty language, the earlier controversies overshadowed his conclusion. What lingered in memory was not a unifying vision, but a sense of division. Trump left the UN remembered less for statesmanship than for declaring climate change a con job, warning European allies that their countries were going to hell, and dismissing the UN itself as an institution of empty words. The reactions in the chamber, quiet laughter, whispers, and skeptical glances, revealed the gap between Trump's intent and how his words were received. What was meant to showcase strength instead came across as a performance that many leaders openly dismissed. That's where the story of the speech ends. As for this channel, it runs without sponsors or corporate backing. It depends entirely on its viewers. If you value independent voices and believe truth shouldn't be for sale, your support matters. Subscribing, leaving a comment, or even just liking the video helps signal to the platform that these perspectives deserve to be heard. Small actions add up, and together they're what allow this channel and the idea of independent truth to keep going. Thank you.